AJ Weidner, Reality Check. Thanks for watching. Hit like and subscribe and help me grow the channel. Some reason we can't get over 25,000 subs, but we're working hard on it. I want to get right to my guest today. I'm very excited to have him on. He's author Timothy Hogan. I have a couple of his books. I have 32 Secret Paths of Solomon, and I think Element of Elements. And I did not realize until a couple of days ago that he's written a bunch of other books, which I'm now going to get: The Alchemical Keys to Masonic Ritual, The Way of the Templar. Hey, Timothy, glad to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, you were just dropping some mind-numbing info on me that kind of shook me up a little bit. Now I've got to get my get back on the car here and drive this thing. But I'm still thinking about what you told me, and wow. So anyway, Timothy has written these great books, and he's also you're a head or you're a member of the Templars right here in the United States.
Yes, I'm a worldwide Grand Master of the Order of the Temple of Secret Initiates, and we run the Templar Collegia in conjunction with that, which is kind of like a pre-study body. And we, international body, but I'm based here in the United States. The Grand Master before me was based out of France, but
right.
Yeah.
So how far back does the lineage go of this group?
Well, the lineage actually traces itself back to, well, believe it or not, as far back as 1057. So long before the official founding of the Templar Order. Our sources say that the order was actually founded as early as 1096. Most historians say it was founded in 1118, but we actually have some source material showing it goes back much further than that, and it wasn't really till 1118 that the Roman Church started getting involved.
I see. So they were kind of not, they weren't secret, but they just didn't announce formally that they existed. And so did they stay in France and then go to Jerusalem? Was that what happened, or did they form and then go directly to Jerusalem?
Yeah, they were. Well, they actually formed in Greece and then kind of made their way into Constantinople. And then from there, they expanded into France and Spain area. And then the traditional, some of the traditional founders, of course, were Hugh de Paynes and Godfrey de Saint-Nomar. And they had traveled from France to Constantinople to be initiated and installed, and then eventually they set up a base of operations they had their main headquarters for the Templar Order in Constantinople at the site that they had been initiated in. So,
oh, really? And so, what was the purpose of the Templars, would you say?
Yeah, so the actual purpose, and this kind of is, not in line with what the standard historians like to promote, but they were formed to specifically seek out and find the different groups that were preserving aspects of this primordial tradition from pre-cataclysmic times. So it was believed that when Atlantis collapsed, it had kind of spread out into different areas. There were pockets of survival that had spread out, and they had grown their own communities. And so the Templar Order was really just trying to seek out these communities to gain the knowledge that they had, as well as go into places like Jerusalem, and they had become aware of that there were certain artifacts, so they started digging for those, and then they went into other places like Egypt and were looking at the temple walls and places like Philae and Dendera and other places like that.
So is this related to like the chronicling orders that Pope Sylvester kind of ordered around that time?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
basically, I mean, as early as as early as 1057, when it started when it was formed in Greece, that's kind of where it started. They were looking at, okay, where did the Greeks get this stuff from? Where did the Pythagorean mysteries, where were those coming from? What was the source of all this stuff? And that took them up into took them into places like Rome, up into Constantinople, which was had been kind of the last headquarters of Rome for a while. Yep. And then they started working with, they were largely coming out of these Gnostic families from southern France. So the Albigensians were preserving certain things, the Bogomils, the Paulian Gnostics, and from there they went down in the Middle East and made connections with groups like the Druze and the Sabaeans, different Islamic groups, and it wasn't until really when they got the rule, when Saint Bernard of Clairvaux did the rule, it was composed of 72 articles. Each article actually corresponded to one of the 72 Kabbalistic names of God, because they had also been working with Rashi of Troyes, or Troyes, who was a very famous Kabbalist in the region where the rule was also first brought forward. And so there's a lot more going into that founding of the Templar order than what most people think.
So it would be fair to say that Freemasonry came out of this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, most people, when they think of the Templar order, they just think of these knights, crusading knights, but actually, the Templar order they had farmers and sea captains, and they set up the banking system, and they had clerics, and then they had a whole fleet of stonemasons. In fact, the earliest Templar rule refers to the fact that the only people that were allowed to wear gloves in the Templar order were the priests and the stonemasons, the stonemasons within the Templar order. And they built over 1,000 Gothic structures in 200 years. And so when the order was suppressed, it was very easy for them to transition and become other things like a stonemasons guild, which ultimately became Freemasonry. But they also survived in other forms, like in Portugal as the Knights of Christ, and in Germany there's a group known as the Militia Crucifera Evangelica, which was ultimately ended up forming the Rosicrucian movement. But that was all underground Templars that had been existing in Germany. And there were these pockets of survival that had, just like with the fall of Atlantis. I mean, when Atlantis fell, there was these pockets of survival that had spread out. And when the Templar order was suppressed, same thing, there were these pockets of survival that had spread out and became different things. And certainly Freemasonry is one of them.
Right. So the Scottish Rite came from the Templars, as also probably the founding of America, I would imagine.
Yeah, for sure. So my great grandfather, seven generations back, was General Joseph Warren, who was the first Grand Master of Freemasonry for the forming United States of America. He was a Grand Master within the Templar tradition himself, and he's the one who initiated Paul Revere into Freemasonry. And he was also, he was kind of the martyr of the American Revolutionary War. But it was based that war was fought for a number of reasons, but one of them was certainly to promote this Templar idea that people had God-given rights, which was just a unheard of thing in the past, where your rights either came from the king or they came from the church. And the Templars were saying, look, no, rights are God-given, they don't, and this is even mentioned in Wolfram von Eschenbach's book Parzival from the 1200s, where it specifically says that, if any Templar should become ruler of a foreign people, let him ensure that they are given their rights, and it's referring to their God-given rights. And it's the first time in history where this was suggested. And then the foundation of the United States of America certainly played up that idea.
Yeah, so I'm going to bounce around here because I find this very interesting. Would you, if I said that the building of the Gothic cathedrals was a very beautiful thing, but it was also a way for the Templars to undermine the church by introducing, because you had to learn to read and write and do arithmetic and geometry in order to be a builder on a cathedral, and you needed thousands of builders, so you needed a big labor force. So would you characterize it as kind of an undermining also of the power of the church?
For sure, yeah. I mean, if you look at, in fact, the very construction of the cathedral itself was built like a giant body in stone. And is the reason why they were called Notre Dame or Our Lady. I mean, where the baptismal fonts at the area of the belly button, the choirs at the area of the lungs, the priest speaks from the area of the heart, and the sacraments kept at the area of the brow or the third eye.
Just like Egypt.
Just like in Egypt. Just like in Egypt. And then when you leave the cathedral, you go through the arch, which is the birth canal. So if the cathedral is Our Lady, Notre Dame, Mary, and you're being born from her, what does that make you? It makes you a Christ.
Right.
And this was a very Gnostic idea.
Very.
But completely, out of the realm of standard Roman Catholic dogma. And even things like the labyrinth that you find at like Chartres Cathedral, where it represented the pilgrimage to the Holy Land when people walk the labyrinth. But I mean, this was a Gnostic idea too, the idea that like the Holy Land wasn't a place somewhere on the earth. It was a place within yourself, and you had to, in walking this labyrinth, you're going deeper within yourself. And again, very, very Gnostic idea, but and there are other things too, like all the alchemical ideas preserved on the cathedrals, the astrological ideas that are preserved in them, sacred geometry. There's a number of things involved in it, but these were all it was based on the Egyptian temples, what was found in Egypt, and then it was created even more there in France. And traditionally, historians will say those cathedrals were built by the companions, but the companions were composed of two groups that they were known as the Children of Solomon and the Children of the Master Jacques. And the Children of Solomon, if you talk to them, they just said that, well, their full name were the Children of the Poor Knights of Solomon. Poor Knights of Christ of the Temple of Solomon, which is the Templars.
Right.
And the Children of the Master Jacques, they'll tell you that the Master Jacques was Jacques de Molay, who was burnt at the stake. So they were both just, again, descendants of that entire Templar strain. And those cathedrals were definitely built to preserve this esoteric knowledge.
Hang on just one second. I want to get rid of this. Is that what we're doing? I have no idea what's going on, so. Well, I can't figure out what's going on. Anyway, hopefully it'll go away here soon.
What's going, are you getting a weird feedback or
No, I'm getting a phone call from somebody on my computer.
oh, weird. Well, I don't know about that.
Okay, now it's gone. All right, sorry about that. Yeah, so I guess what I'm getting here is that the Templars went out into the world to gather information. Probably they learned about the catastrophe somehow, which is what the Cross of Henday probably was part of, and they learned about Gnosticism, probably in the Middle East, and they were blown away by the Gnostic ideas, as most people are when they first encounter them. And because they're offering, you are the liberator of your own spiritual being and not anybody else. There's no arbiter in Gnosticism. That's why it's so appealing, especially to intellectuals and people who find faith to be maybe a little bit of a dubious idea and are not really interested in faith. And so they brought this back and realized that the church didn't really take too kindly to the Gnostics, and so they had to be secretive about it, and you know, because it would be their lives, right?
Yeah, well, and ultimately it was. I mean, when they were suppressed in 1307 and accused of heresy, I mean, that heresy was in many ways tied directly to their, I mean, it had to do with their association with certain Gnostic groups in the Middle East, but it also had to do with their own secret practices. And, you know, all you have to do is look at the Templar seals from the Middle Ages and, or, you know, from that time period, from the 1200s. And one of the seals that was used by the order was the symbol of Abraxas, which was completely a Gnostic idea. That's not something you find within the Roman Church. And it was, but it was, you know, it represented the stages of initiation and the cycles of time and a number of other things. But it was, you know, ultimately it had to do with personal development and personal illumination, personal gnosis, direct knowledge of the divine through one's own personal efforts, and you know, without necessarily needing the intervention of a priest. You know, and that's bad business if you're the Roman Church at the time.
Yes, and they paid the Gnostics in southern France paid dearly for their heresy in the First Crusade, or the Second Crusade, really. Yeah, so so these ideas of Gnosticism, which is, you know, you're your own personal savior, and that you find you find solace through meditation and gaining knowledge about the world. These are very deep traditions coming down several places. India, the Middle East, even Native Americans have these same traditions of this kind of idea. And so a vast organization like the Catholic Church could not have this. And so, you know, also I find it kind of ironic that the Templars, the time of the Templars was the time of the warming of Europe. From about 1000 to about 1300, Europe really, you could grow grapes in Scotland.
Yeah, that's right.
It was that warm, and you know, that's when they conquered Iceland and all that, and then they killed they tried to destroy the Templars. And winter came down on them, the plagues came down. I'm not saying the Templars did it, but I just find it, because I don't think you can spread a plague like that. I think that was a real plague. So I just find it ironic that, you know, the church brought down the Templars, and then the worst 300 years in Europe history occurs, you know, and ironic for sure. So I personally, you know, a long time ago, I got into a high-ranking Freemasons library and read I think everything that you can't, and I'm getting killed here today. And turn this off. And I got the general idea when I got done with all these books that the basic reason for like the Templars and the Freemasons is to pass on the information, both of high spiritual information, but also the information about the cycles of time, and that you have to be prepared mentally and spiritually for each cycle of time that you're going in. And I'm getting killed here today. I don't know what's going on. And what do you know about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely the rituals do preserve the cycles of time. They also preserve kind of the building blocks for rebuilding civilization. I mean, if civilization were to collapse again, like it had the fall of Atlantis, contained within the ritual are all of the building blocks of things you're going to need to reset up government and structure and arts and sciences, and to get humanity back on track again.
Right.
And in fact, most Masonic traditions around the world, when people are initiated into Freemasonry, they're required to memorize an extensive amount of material, and that memory work is basically it's all the key elements of the initiation ceremonies that they went through, but contained within that are all the seeds for rebuilding civilization, and also the keys of what to look for with not only the cycles of time, but also with alchemy itself. How do you refine and process minerals and herbs and everything else to make everything from medicine to acids to alkalis to whatever you need in order to rebuild civilization.
So civilization is in dire straits right now.
Yeah.
I never really thought I'd live to see what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and I have to ask you, because I wonder myself almost on a daily basis, where are our, the Templars, and where are the free? How come you're not coming to save us? I mean, we got men or women, and they're sticking us with stuff, and I guess it's legal now to talk on YouTube about certain things, but I'm not going to talk
Right.
about it. Give them a chance to knock me off.
Well, yeah,
there's
some. Yeah.
So where are they?
Some,
I mean, are we just going into a waiting period and going to let this thing play out? I mean, you can't really fight it. We can't do something violent against it or anything.
Right.
That would be playing right into their hands. So I guess that's the game, is to just let it wait out, and then in the aftermath we emerge and we rebuild the place, sort of like what I think maybe the Georgia Guidestones were doing, was kind of creating a Rosetta Stone of 8 languages, and so you'd be able to read different languages based on, and now they're gone, which was a shock too. So so what is the game? Do you guys know that are we headed towards a catastrophe? I mean, is the insider knowledge say that we're headed that way?
I would say that civilization is always on the brink of collapse. It's always within 2 weeks of collapse. Like people have no concept of how fragile their system is. Literally all it takes is one major solar flare, one major Carrington event, like what happened in the 1800s, that could wipe out our entire power grid system, and everything that we have stored digitally would be erased, and nobody would know how to do anything. Or, like, again, there's bigger things like asteroids and comets and things of that nature. But, we have been fortunate for the last couple hundred years to be in a relative time of peace. I mean, we've been warring amongst ourselves, but from as far as the natural world goes, it's been relatively peaceful. But I mean, that could always collapse at any time. And our biggest threat at the moment that we're facing beyond all the natural world is just ourselves, because our technology has outpaced our spirituality, and we have psychopathic leaders who just want to push their own agendas without caring about the bigger order and about people's rights. And so I will say that the Templar streams, they haven't disappeared. They're still trying to influence, subtly in ways that they can. You can't really force people to do things they don't want to do, but you can try to educate them, like what you're doing. I mean, that's all you can do.
Okay, I ask you the big question is, where did the Templar wealth come from that got them to build all those Gothic cathedrals? Did they discover the secret of alchemy?
They were doing alchemy, for sure, 100%. They were doing alchemy. They learned they were working with groups, again, like the Druze, who I mentioned before, who were practicing alchemy. There were also Islamic mystics that would later be called Sufi, that practicing alchemy, and they absolutely learned these things from them. And I mean, these were the preservers that were translating the Greek and Egyptian and Roman ideas on this, and were preserving it. And the Sabaeans are another group. But ultimately, so that was part of it. But then the other part of it was the Templars were also secretly, at the time, making trips over to the New World and making trades with the Maya and the Aztecs and the other tribes there. And they were leaving out of La Rochelle and the port in La Rochelle, and they were sailing to the New World and making
Sinclair.
and bringing gold back, and so that was part of what was going on too. That's part of what was being used. And when Christopher Columbus found out about this, he actually went to the King of Portugal and was like, "Hey, fund me to go over to this, across the ocean. There's this land across the ocean in the New World. Fund me to go there." And the King of Portugal was basically like, "We already know it. We've been protecting the Templars, and they've been doing this for the last 100 years." And so what Columbus did, is he went and he pulled the daughter of the Grand Master. So one of the Grand Masters of the Templar Order had died, and his daughter was in a convent, and Christopher Columbus pulled her out of the convent and married her, took the maps that she was hanging on to, then went to Spain, the enemy of Portugal, and was like, "Well, fine, Portugal, if you're not going to help me, I'm going to go to your enemy." Went to Spain. Spain ended up funding him, and the rest is history. He ended up going across the New World to try to find the source of some of this gold that the Templars are bringing back. And then also, by this point, it was known by the church that the Templar Order had attained a bunch of holy artifacts in the Holy Land from their archaeological excavations, and they most likely brought them over to the New World to hide them. And so, Christopher Columbus was looking for those as well. And then the church went to look for those after that. That's part of the reason why they went to suppress the natives so much.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of strange stuff going on in America at that time, pre-Columbus. That the more you look at it, the stranger it gets. It's like there's advanced temples here. There's all sorts of stuff that archaeologists of the 1800s were finding that are now gone, and we don't know, where they went. Do they blow them up? What do they do with them? I don't know, but I think there's been a presence here for a lot longer than we think. Like, I think the Templars may have gone over to the New World, by 1100, maybe even, or so, maybe 1200. They were making their forays in and getting copper and gold and bringing it back. And yeah, they were trading with the Quetzalcoatl could very likely be a Templar. He was white skinned and had a beard, and
For sure.
so we don't know.
When I went down, I was going to say, when I went down to the Yucatan, and I met with some Mayan tribes down there, and they were performing. I gave them a particular hand grip that we learned in the Templar order, and it's also passed on in Freemasonry and some other traditions, and they recognized it immediately, and they allowed me to participate in their ceremony down there. And it was almost, there was some cultural differences, but for the most part, it was the exact same ceremony that we do in the Templar order to this day. In a version of it is done within Freemasonry to this day, in the third degree of Freemasonry to this day. And I thought for sure, oh, well, the Mayans must have learned it from the Templars. But then they actually took me to a museum they had created, because they had it's kind of a sad commentary, but they took apart this pyramid that they had down there to use the stones to build fences down in the jungle down there, which is like a sad commentary in itself. But within the pyramid, they found certain artifacts, including a mortar and pestle and a jade mask, and these figurines. And the figurines are performing the ceremony. And those figurines have been carbon dated to being as early as 900 of our current era. So that means they were doing those ceremonies long before the Templars ever arrived there. And, the suggestion is that these ceremonies could be a remnant from Atlantis as well, that had been passed down through these different traditions. And when the Templars came over, they exchanged these hand grips. They had the same ceremonies, and relatively the same, so that they just recognized each other. So they were able to do trading with each other, long before the world knew.
Yeah, and there's just odd things in America that most people don't know about. I know a person who's a archaeologist in Utah, and he told me that there's caves in Utah with ancient Egyptian writing on the walls, and temples with Egyptian statues, and it was very, very strange. It was the cave in the Grand Canyon, and it's just.
I actually got in trouble for trying to go in there back in the 90s.
Hey, yes, I did that too. I got in trouble too. I didn't get in there. Did you get in?
No, it was all sealed up. The cave we got to, and all cemented up, so I wasn't able to get in there. But I did get some photos of some pictographs that looked like Anubis near the outside of it, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I actually had a guy lead through a back way, right? It was a little tiny tunnel. It was about 5 feet wide, maybe 2.5 feet wide. And I was going down the tunnel, and each step I got more and more freaked out. And my partner too was getting freaked out. And I said, they got some kind of, sonic thing in here or something to scare everybody who comes in here, so we don't even bother going. We turned around. We couldn't take it. I mean, it was like literally, I was terrified, and I have no idea why. And as I went away towards the door, I got less and less terrified until I was perfectly fine by the time I got to the door. And then later I was talking to somebody in the military. They said, oh yeah, like we got that stuff all the time. We can make a whole crowd go crazy in fear if we want. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. So in the view of with what and through your studies and the Templars and all that, why don't you give us your version of what alchemy is?
Sure. Well, I mean,
to it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, alchemy is transmutation, right? It's taking something of a lesser value and transmuting it or transforming it into something of greater value. And there's different types of alchemy. I mean, there's herbal alchemy, there's metallic alchemy, there's psychological alchemy, there's social alchemy. Anytime you're trying to influence a large group of people. That's a form of social alchemy. But then there's also, there's within alchemy, there's the preservation of this different knowledge, and this understanding of where this tradition came from in ancient times, and how it's been preserved. And certainly there've been all kinds of myths associated with things like the Emerald Tablet, and other things tied in with this. The Gnostics were preserving alchemical ideas. In fact, many later alchemists, like Valentinus, for example, they actually chose their names from earlier Gnostic leaders. And because it was so closely connected. So, there was the raising of consciousness aspect to gnosis, or the liberating of the soul personality into a new way of being beyond the current physical way of being incarnated. But there's also there was this aspect of metallic transmutation as well. And I do believe that this was one of the secrets to the Holy Grail. It's become real popular in recent years to say, oh, well, it's just about this bloodline between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And whether that does or does not exist, the early Grail legends make it very clear. They describe the Grail as a stone. Well, they describe it as an emerald, and then they also describe it as a stone that burns the phoenix to ashes, after which the phoenix comes back renewed, and it restores health and vitality and gnosis. It also, within Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parsifal, there's a main character called Trevisrent, the hermit. Well, the word, and he's the one who guides Percival, the Grail champion in the story. And well, Trevisrent just means threefold knower. And hermit comes from Hermes. So Trevisrent the hermit is Hermes Trismegistus, or the patron saint, the father of alchemy.
Right.
So you can't just ignore these aspects of it. And those same texts say that from the 1200s say that the Templars are the guardians of the Holy Grail. So there's that aspect of it, that alchemical aspect of it.
Yeah, I think, what I think in my advanced years here now is that we're surrounded, and we know this is true, we're surrounded by invisible plasma energy, which could be called
Yes.
anything, chi, prana, or electrical energy. And I
Yes.
believe the stone absorbs all of that. And,
Yeah.
and until it reaches like a capacity. It's like a capacitor, actually.
Yeah.
And it absorbs that. And if you can flake some of that off and ingest it, you're not going to live forever or anything like that. That's not in the cards, although there may be people that do that. But what it's going to do, it's just going to revitalize your health, so that, because you want to live a long time to study, because if you're a true Gnostic, then you know that the more you know when you die, the you have a better chance on the other side of going somewhere decently. And so knowledge becomes the only thing that is worth doing, really, on earth. And if you're not pursuing knowledge on a daily basis, I like to buy a book about once every 2 months. I buy a book that I totally disagree with, and then force myself to read it. Right.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, it does a curious, weird thing to my brain, because while I'm reading the book, I find I'm starting to agree with it. And then later, when I close the book, and it's a couple of days later, I realize, oh, that was the craziest thing I've ever read, right? But while I was reading it, I found myself falling into agreement with crazy ideas. And I think that you have to keep, that's what alchemy does. It makes the mind elastic. It makes you understand it. Pretty much, you don't really understand anything. And,
Yeah.
even if you start now, you're going to never get to the point where you actually understand everything. And all the great thinkers were alchemists. I mean, or they studied alchemy, at least, from Jung to Leonardo, Newton. I mean, everybody studied alchemy that knows anything. In fact, I would say that one of the reasons that I'm successful is because, for some reason, rich people want to talk to me about alchemy. And so I end up talking to, I've known like millionaires and billionaires, and they always fly me because they think I got some secret that's going to get, they're going to get long life from me. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works.
I got approached by a casino once. I was given a lecture on alchemy, and a representative from this casino came up to me afterwards and wanted to talk with me about helping them out with some stuff. I was like, oh, I don't think this is quite the right way of I call that alchemy instead of alchemy. It's mal.
There is nothing more darker on this planet than a casino. I mean, if you know your alchemy, that is counter alchemy, what they're doing to you there with the bells and the lights and I can't stand casinos. I just can't stand them.
I do think the alchemical tradition has always preserved this idea that this science was a technology that had been preserved and had been utilized by the ancients, whether that you call that the gods or the Anunnaki or the whatever you want to say. There were these beings in antiquity who were practicing this and passed this on to humanity, and it was being preserved within the priesthoods. And they were pulling energy out of the air and using it to transmute things. And like Fulcanelli says, the Dark Ages weren't the Dark Ages. Those are the ages where everybody was fat and sassy, and that's because they understood this resonant frequency technology that we have lost. And I have no idea how we lost it. I really don't. I don't get it. I know that Tesla was running after this, and I know that, and the problem is that it's free energy. So no corporation wants to pursue it. But it's definitely a reality, and the alchemists knew it. They knew how to do it.
That's what Egypt was. That's what the Great Pyramid was. And
Yep.
they were working with these invisible elements that our science refuses to acknowledge. And, they did some stupid experiment at the beginning of the 20th century, which they thought disproved the ether. So they just threw it out, and we adapted the Einsteinian model, and we've been paying ever since. And
Einstein himself believed in an ether, towards the end of his life, he had several quotes talking about believing in ether and proving that, all that early experiment did was prove that that light doesn't slow down in an etheric field. That's all it proved. It was an optics experiment, and that was the end.
Exactly right.
It got miscategorized,
Yeah, because ether's like the atmosphere around the earth. It moves with the earth, and you can't. I mean, it's like stupid, actually. The whole thing is stupid because it's everywhere. So naturally, you're going to get the same reading no matter what happens. So it's complete misreading of what the ether is. And I'm really, a big proponent of trying to bring back ether science, etheric science, because I think we just really lost our way. And I agree with you about technology. It's gotten so far ahead of us now that I actually believe that if we continue on the way that we're going on, technology is going to make us all mentally ill. I really do. I think it seems to make people mentally ill. The more they're immersed in their social media, the more they're immersed in all this stuff, the more you watch them slipping from reality, right? And start believing things that aren't true. And you can't debate it because it's this weird, what's going on in the world today. It's this weird left brain mania, not right brain mania. It's left brain mania. They think they've got it figured all out, and they're not going to listen to anybody try to talk them out of what they've got figured out, right? And there's no love, there's no compassion, there's no artistry, there's none of the right brain aspects are involved in this. And so everybody's having a left brain argument against other left brain arguments, and everybody's arguing and fighting each other, and nobody's bringing in the right brain at all, which would completely, I'll finally understand that actually we agree on probably 85% of everything. Right? If we would just stop for a minute, take a deep breath, and let the right brain come in for a little while. But everybody is now, and it's all faulty. It's left brain logic, but the logic itself is faulty logic. So, and everybody is arguing from that position, and until we decide that we're going to bring our brains into the right brain in, we're going to be in big trouble. We could actually have some kind of conflict, I think, and I'm really worried about it. I was going to ask you one other thing here. They always say that Columbus flew the Templar flag on the mast on his 3 ships. Do you think he did that because he knew the Native Americans were cool with the Templars, and that way he could make inroads? Do you think that's why he did that for?
I think that's exactly why he did it. I think he was he knew that they would recognize that symbol, and he put it on the ships because he knew he'd be welcome that way. Ironically, there's actually a passage in one of Columbus's ship logs where it talks about how they had gone to an island off the coast of Cuba, and some of the members of his ship had gone out onto the island, and they encountered a large group of natives that were already meeting with this white European dude with a beard who was dressed in a white tunic with a red cross on it. And so his ship party got freaked out by this, ran back to report it to the everyone else on the ship, like, hey, there's already some people here. And so they organized a search party to go back out, but they weren't able to find them again.
He probably ran into the woods.
But like even in Columbus's own ship logs, he describes coming across Templars who were already here working with the natives, and that part is just kind of ignored from what's become the standard history.
you're making me really curious now, because I know that Pizarro's chronicler said that Atahualpa was white.
Mhm.
He had white skin and blue eyes. And now
Yep.
I'm beginning to wonder if the Templars didn't maybe go renegade a little bit.
I think so for sure. I mean, we know they were, at least according to our Templar lineage. I mean, there were close associations with several tribes in both North America and as far down as Panama. So, and where they were actually interbreeding with tribal members, and there were tribes like the Micmac and the Mandan and the all the way to like the Blackfoot tribes they were working with, and then going down into the Maya and I personally have met with Hopi down in area of Arizona, and I've exchanged certain grips with them that they've completely recognized and allowed me to participate in their ceremonies. Same with the Mayans. And so,
Yeah,
and
the Hopi have the cross. Their
they do.
symbol looks very, very similar to the cross.
Yep,
Yeah.
same thing. So I mean, the suggestion is, and Scott Walter does really good research with this on his stuff related to the rune stone up in Minnesota, but
Right.
as the idea of it being a Templar artifact. But the whole reason why that rune stone was put there, the Kensington rune stone, was because that was the center of North America. And they were doing they had already mapped the entire bit of North America, and they're putting it in the exact center as a land claim, because they'd already established those relationships with the tribes.
So then the Templars probably are the ones who produced the Piri Reis map, right?
Oh,
I
for
mean,
sure. Absolutely.
yeah.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And it was
So
based on earlier knowledge that they had.
right.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah, and
curious
the reason why it
because
was in Constantinople. I mean, which was again one of their main bases of operations in the Middle
right.
East, and that's where Hugh de Paynes and Godfrey de Saint Omar were initiated. So
Yep. Yeah, it's funny because I'm reading from my first book right now on my other show, Monument to the End of Time, which came out in I think '99. I think we only printed 1,000 copies, so it's very similar to Mystery of the Cathedrals, and that hardly anybody read it. So I'm reading it to give it away free because it costs like $1,000 on Amazon right now. So
yeah, it was like
yeah.
$4,000 or something ridiculous.
It is
Yeah.
ridiculous. But we and when I was working at Gaia, one of the projects I really wanted to do was to do a whole documentary series on the Templars. I bought like 50 books on the Templars and read them all. I still have them. And I was really enthusiastic. I spent all this time writing up this big, huge, thing for Gaia. And then everybody just kind of gave it a big yawn. And I realized that there was just no way I could explain how amazing the Templars and their history was in 5 minutes, because I get pitch times of like 5-10 minutes. And
Sure.
you're up to 1,200, and so by the time the 5 minutes are over, you can't even get to the rest of the story, which is even more amazing. And so do you think that the Bogomils and the Cathars were all part of the Templar orders?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. In fact, when Lord Raymond, who was
Yep.
the head of the Albigensian Cathar army, when he was killed when the Roman Church did the crusade against the Albigensians, he was denied burial on Holy Land, quote unquote Holy Land, Roman Catholic Holy Land. And so the Templars actually buried him in their Toulouse preceptory building, and that's where he's still buried to this day. I mean, that building ended up getting, when the Templars were suppressed, it was given to the Knights Hospitalier, who eventually became the Knights of Malta, and it's still a Knight of Malta building now to this day. But Lord Raymond is still buried down there now, and it's now been turned into a hotel. So in the literally the basement, the crypt of this hotel, Lord Raymond's still buried down there. But originally he was being preserved by the Templars because of their close association. And even Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who wrote the rule for the Templars, he at one point in time he had been sent down to southern France to condemn the Albigensian Cathars, and by the church, and he ended up coming back and saying he thought they were actually more Christian than the Christians of Rome. He refused to condemn them. And so that kind of backfired, but then they ended up doing a crusade against them anyways. But
yeah, a really bloody crusade. Yeah. So you guys are going to Egypt, right? You and Johnny Enoch, and when's that? When are you going?
Going to be in March of 2023. We're going to go to, pretty much all the temples that we can go to down there, as well as the Great Pyramid, and part of that, tying in with the Templar stuff, we'll be looking at the Templar carvings and graffiti and stuff that was done at both the Temple of Isis at Philae, which, by the way, the Temple of Isis, where the Templars at Philae, where the Templars set up their commandery in Egypt in the 1200s, that's where they got their that's really where they got their ideas for the statues of Isis and Horus that they brought back to southern France, which then became the Black Madonna statues.
That's right.
We're putting these cathedrals like shot around France, but the idea came from the Temple of Isis at Philae, where they had their base of operations.
Yeah, and there's something about those Black Madonnas that's very alchemical, because they're black stone, and it's a baby, and the woman's they're really quite moving. I visited about 30 of them actually, all throughout Europe, and they're really quite moving, and they're very alchemical. They have this weird effect, like the same thing that the hieroglyphs in Egypt have on you, where you almost have like a psychedelic experience as you're trying to grasp what they're actually trying to tell you. It's very, very interesting. And I don't know if it's the frequencies that they built them or what, but that's really what it is that the Templars rediscovered not all, but a lot of the ancient science of resonant frequency. And then they ensconced it into the buildings that they built back in Europe when they finally got kicked out of Jerusalem, and they went back, and the towers with the sweeping metal rods coming up, and the turrets and the arches. These are functional. This is not just decorative. This is functional.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. And we shouldn't forget, the sciences that were preserved carved on the outsides and on the insides of these cathedrals. I mean, this is really what led to the Renaissance.
Absolutely. The building of the Gothic cathedrals led to the Reformation, the Renaissance, even Martin Luther. You can just see, if you know your history, how even Willie Durant talked about how this became the impetus for all of the change. In fact, you could say that the Templars reset Europe. That's what they did. They reset Europe, and they did it in the window of warming period at perfect timing. And they created, the banking system where you could write checks to each other, so you didn't have to have guys with money riding through the forest at night getting robbed. And they created the navies were all created by the Templars. They preserved from the knowledge that they got from the Phoenicians, and I mean, they're the fulcrum of Western history, and they don't get enough credit. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, well, I'd agree with you there. And
Yeah,
and
well,
I believe that you know, their association with these other groups, these other centers of preservation, that then they brought all of that knowledge back to Europe. And yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, that was the change. That was the point where things changed. And but those a lot of those traditions still exist to this day, the ones that the Templars were meeting with. I mean, they're still preserving these elements, just like the Templars are. And I mean, we continue to have close associations with these different groups around the world, in the hopes, trying to get ideas out there to bring the world together, because the only way we're going to get off planet and head for the stars is if we get along with each other down here first. I mean, I don't even think we're going to be allowed to leave this planet if we can't stop fighting with each other. So
yeah, we're going to need a different education system to run a high-tech world. And I'm saying this all the time, but the laws of entropy are still evident. So you're going to need to repair all these machines. You're going to need to have literally an army of engineers. And we need to start right now creating an army of engineers, because that's how we're going to be successful. And that's a way to forge peace across people, because construction and building things and teaching other people how to build things is really the way towards building a really great civilization, which is really what I want. I want a great civilization, and I'm not too happy with the one I'm getting right now. I got to be honest.
I agree with you.
Well, listen, I'm really happy that you joined us, Timothy, and I really would like to go on that trip to Egypt. I bet that is going to be really fun. And I'd like to have you back. I'd like to talk about a couple other things, and like the relationship between Freemasonic ritual and Kabbalah. Super interests me. The origins of the Kabbalah, which I suspect have to do with the Templars, now that I think about it, because they came out at the same time. So there's a lot here to unwrap, and I want to do it slow. I don't want to go fast. All right.
All right. Sounds great. Well, I'd love to be back. Thanks for having me. It's enjoyable. It's always enjoyable to talk with somebody who already has knowledge of the subject, so you can just roll with it. So it's
yeah, exactly. We don't have to waste any time trying to explain things. And if you get lost, people, I'm going to create a book list coming up here that you can get. I'm the only books you can get, not rare alchemical books. I won't pull that one on you, but I will give you a list. So these things seem a little mysterious. I'm going to try to make a list so that you guys can read up and unravel that. Also, my book, Mysteries of the Great Cross of Henday, unravels a lot of this also, with the late, great Vincent Bridges. All right, there it is. Mysteries of the Great Cross of Henday. Yep. I'm very flattered that you read my book. Not very many people have got to the end. Did you get to the end?
I got to the end. Yeah, it's a great book.
Well, thank you. All right, everybody. I'm Jay Weidner. We've been watching Reality Check. We've had a great time with Timothy Hogan and learning about alchemy. And hit like and subscribe, and I'll be back again real soon with another show. Thanks for watching. This is Jay Weidner, Reality Check, and we're starting a membership plan for content that we don't normally want to put up on some of these platforms, and I want you to join. We're not going to stop doing the regular shows. We're just adding content. Be a lot more one-on-one stuff with me, and I think you guys will find it really interesting. So we'll put it up here below how you can get into the membership plan, and please join. I'm Jay Weidner, and thanks for watching.